The Wadi alien princess was convinced her species was doomed until she met a human who would make the aggressors pay dearly in blood. 22-year-old human Mark Collins had come to the Wadi homeworld to study their advanced bioengineering, but tension was in the air. The aggressive Zorgon Empire was pushing in on pacifist Wadi territory. As Mark settled into his cramped university dorm, sirens blared in the distance. Zorgon war machines were on the move. Students and faculty rushed about in a panic. Sneaking off campus that night, Mark discovered a hidden courtyard. Sitting alone on a bench, sobbing, was Princess Karos, the Wadi Emperor's daughter. Her delicate blue skin glistened with tears in the moonlight. She startled as Mark approached. "Wait, I won't hurt you. I'm Mark, a human exchange student." "What's wrong?" Mark asked gently. "My people, we are finished. The Zorgons will enslave us all. We have no army to fight back. I am Princess Karos, but soon I will be a Zorgon concubine, and my people will be thralls and corpses," Karos cried, shaking. Anger boiled in Mark's gut. He had seen war before during his time as a Marine on Earth. He knew what horrors awaited the Wadi if the cruel Zorgons took over. He couldn't just stand by. "Princess Karos, I will find a way to save your people. I swear it. If I have to kill every last Zorgon myself, I'll do it. You have my word," Mark vowed. He took her delicate blue hand in his. He would move heaven and earth to keep this promise. The Zorgons had no idea what fury they had just unleashed. Mark opened his mouth to reassure Karos, when the ground shook with a violent tremor. A deafening blast rang out and shards of the elegant stained glass windows rained down on them. Zorgon shock troops had blown a hole in the perimeter wall. Alarms blared as smoke billowed from key buildings across campus. "We have to move now," Mark barked, grabbing Karos's hand. His mind raced through options as they sprinted into the main hall. Screams and the thud of running feet echoed off the crystal walls. Ahead, Zorgon lasers flashed. Mark pulled Karos behind a pillar as bolts sizzled past. Huddled against the wall were a dozen Wadi students, many bleeding from shrapnel wounds. A girl was curled up, leg bent at an unnatural angle, tears streaking her face. Mark's training kicked in. He snatched a medkit off the wall and knelt beside her. "I'm Mark, I can help. This will sting." He spread coagulant gel on her cuts. "You're going to be okay. Breathe." Mark turned to the terrified group. "Everyone mobile, grab a wounded classmate, help them walk. We're heading for the bunker under the science building. Karos, get that fire extinguisher. Spray anything that moves." Mark hefted the injured girl in his arms. "Stay low, run fast, let's go." Karos clutched the extinguisher, shocked at Mark's transformation from awkward outsider to hardened commander. As they dashed and wove through the smoky halls, dodging falling beams, she felt a fleeting hope. Maybe they weren't doomed. They piled into the reinforced hideout to find professors and students hunched over consoles and medbays. As the heavy blast door clanged shut, a grey-haired instructor whirled around. "Princess, thank the gods you're safe, and who is this?" He eyed Mark suspiciously. "Professor Zoldin, this is Mark Collins of Earth. He saved us from the attack. We can trust him," Karos asserted. Zoldin grunted. Mark set his patient on a cot, then surveyed the high-tech equipment filling the bunker. His eyes widened. Railguns, plasma cannons, drone launchers. It was beyond anything he'd seen on Earth. "Look, you have serious firepower here. Your weapons outclass the Zorgons by light years. But you need to integrate Earth Force tactical doctrine with your tech. I can work with your security team, show them small unit tactics, asymmetric warfare. If we—" "You expect us to put our fate in the hands of a primitive alien?" Zoldin scoffed. "We've seen your history. You're a barbaric, warlike—" "Enough!" Karos snapped. "I am your princess, and I vouch for Mark Collins. He will help us defend our world. Follow his lead." Zoldin pursed his lips, then nodded curtly. Just then a teeth-rattling boom shook the ceiling, raining dust on them. "They found us," Mark growled. "Okay, people, we need to reinforce that entrance. Grab those hull plates. You two get on those particle turrets and target their heavy armor. Princess, let's pull up a hollow map and strategize a counterattack." As Mark directed the defense, He locked eyes with Karos over the flickering hollow table. Lasers flashed, fighters shouted, wounded groaned. But in that shared glance, a profound connection formed. Human courage and Wadi brilliance in seamless tandem. A bond forged in the crucible of war, unbreakable and unyielding against all odds. As the dust settled, Mark surveyed the scorched and shattered bunker. Fallen Zorgan warriors lay crumpled amid the rubble. Wadi defenders emerged from behind barricades, shell-shocked but alive. They had repelled the first wave, but at great cost. Karos's wrist communicator beeped urgently. A flickering image of Emperor Zoltar materialized, his robes torn and his face grim. "Daughter, the palace is under assault. We can't hold out much longer. You must—" The transmission cut to static. "Father, no!" Karos cried out, her voice breaking. She turned to Mark, eyes blazing with determination. "We have to save him. The fate of my people rests on the Emperor's survival." Mark nodded grimly. "I have a plan. We'll need a small team of your best warriors and tech specialists. With my knowledge of human infiltration tactics and your advanced cloaking devices, we can slip past their defenses and extract the Emperor." Karos assembled a crack squad of Wadi commandos, each one heavily armed and fiercely loyal. Mark outlined his strategy, blending Earth Force stealth protocols with Wadi technological wizardry. They set out into the war-torn streets, picking their way through rubble and shattered vehicles. As they neared the palace gates, a hail of plasma bolts sizzled past their heads. Zorgon's shock troops poured out from the shadows, their reptilian faces twisted in rage. Mark and the Wadi team dove for cover, returning fire with a blistering barrage of railgun rounds and particle beams. Mark lobbed a plasma grenade, the explosion sending Zorgons flying. Karos activated her cloaking field, shimmering out of sight, only to reappear behind the enemy line, her blade flashing as she cut down the invaders with graceful lethality. Inch by bloody inch, they fought their way forward, leaving a trail of Zorgon corpses in their wake. Just as they reached the palace courtyard, a desperate cry rang out from a nearby building. Mark's head snapped around. Huddled in the ruins were a group of terrified human tourists caught in the crossfire. "We have to help them," Mark shouted over the din of battle. Karos hesitated, torn between her mission and the innocent lives at stake. "We can't abandon them," Mark pressed. "It's not just about winning this war, it's about protecting the helpless no matter where they come from." Karos met his gaze. Seeing the conviction burning in his eyes, she gave a curt nod, and they diverted their course, carving a path to the trapped humans. They formed a protective cordon around the shell-shocked group, ushering them to a nearby safe house. As the adrenaline ebbed, the tourists poured out their thanks, tears streaking their faces. An elderly man stepped forward, his voice trembling. "We overheard the Zorgons talking while they held us captive. They spoke of a secret weapon, a doomsday device hidden in the heart of their command ship." Mark and Karos traded a knowing glance. This intelligence could change everything. Armed with renewed purpose and a deepening bond of trust, they gathered their team and raced towards the besieged palace, determined to save the Emperor and uncover the key to defeating the Zorgan menace once and for all. As the royal palace loomed before them, Mark, Karos, and their hand-picked squad of Wadi commandos surveyed the formidable defenses. Zorgan warriors swarmed the perimeter, their plasma rifles glinting in the harsh sunlight. Mark's brow furrowed as he studied the holographic map projected from Karos's wrist device. "There," he pointed, zooming in on a faint line snaking beneath the palace foundations. "The hidden passage the tourists mentioned. It's our best shot at getting inside undetected." Karos nodded, her eyes hardening with resolve. She barked orders to her team in rapid Wadi, dividing them into two groups. "Rykos, take your unit and hit the main gates hard. Draw their fire and keep them occupied. Mark and I will lead the infiltration through the tunnels." The Wadi soldiers saluted sharply, their faces grim and determined. As Rykos's team moved out, Mark and Karos slipped away, darting through rubble-strewn alleys until they reached a concealed access hatch. Karos pressed her palm against the biometric scanner, and with a hiss of hydraulics the hatch slid open, revealing a dark, narrow passageway. Mark clicked on his tactical light, illuminating the ancient stone walls. "Stay alert. We don't know what kind of security measures the Zorgons have put in place down here." They crept forward, footsteps echoing in the oppressive silence. Suddenly a low rumble shook the ground beneath their feet. Mark's eyes widened as he saw a series of razor-sharp pendulum blades swinging down from the ceiling, gaining speed with each arc. "Karos, look out!" He lunged forward, tackling her to the ground just as a blade whistled past, missing them by inches. They rolled to their feet, hearts pounding. "An old Wadi trap, designed to protect the royal family," Karos gasped, studying the intricate mechanism. "I've read about these in our history archives. There should be a hidden switch." Her fingers danced across the stone, searching for the telltale groove. With a click, the blades froze in place, retracting into the ceiling. They pressed on, navigating a gauntlet of pressure plates, false floors, and cryptic alien puzzles that tested their wits and agility. As they neared the end of the tunnel, a flicker of movement caught Mark's eye. He held up a fist, signaling for the team to halt. From the shadows, a squad of Zorgon assassins emerged, their obsidian armor blending with the darkness. Mark recognized the insignia on their breastplates, the Zorgon Emperor's personal guard, trained to eliminate high-value targets with ruthless efficiency. The assassins charged, their electrified blades humming with deadly energy. Mark met the first attacker head-on, blocking the strike with his reinforced gauntlet. He countered with a vicious elbow to the Zorgon's throat, crushing his windpipe. Karos leapt into the fray, her Wadi plasma saber flashing as she parried and slashed with blinding speed. Together, Mark and Karos fought in perfect harmony, their movements fluid and precise. Mark grappled an assassin, slamming him into the stone wall with bone-crushing force, while Karos dispatched another with a searing blast from her wrist-mounted particle beam. The Wadi commandos joined the melee, their advanced weaponry evening the odds against the elite Zorgons. As the last assassin fell, Mark staggered back, clutching his side where a glancing blow had slipped past his defenses. Karos, too, bore the marks of battle, a deep gash across her forehead dripping azure blood. They shared a look of grim satisfaction, knowing that every inch of ground had been hard-won. Battered and exhausted, they finally reached the Emperor's chambers. Mark hacked the door controls and they burst inside, weapons at the ready. The sight that greeted them made their blood run cold. Emperor Zoltar lay sprawled on the floor, his once pristine robes soaked with crimson. A trio of Zorgon captors stood over him, their blades poised to strike. "Father!" Karos cried out, her voice raw with anguish and rage. She launched herself at the nearest Zorgon, her plasma saber sizzling as it cleaved through his armor. Mark was right behind her, his fists and feet a blur of motion as he engaged the remaining captors in a brutal close-quarters brawl. The chamber echoed with the clash of metal on metal, the sizzle of energy weapons, and the grunts of exertion. Mark and Karos fought like demons possessed, their strength and determination fueled by the desperate need to save the Emperor. With a final, devastating blow, Mark crushed the skull of the last Zorgon warrior, letting the lifeless body slump to the floor. Karos rushed to her father's side, cradling his head in her lap. Mark knelt beside her, his heart sinking as he saw the severity of the Emperor's wounds. He fumbled for his comlink, barking orders for an immediate extraction. As they waited for their rescue, Karos looked up at Mark, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "Mark, I fear my father's injuries are too grave. He may not survive the journey to safety." Mark gripped her hand, his voice steady and resolute. "We'll do everything in our power to save him, Karos. But no matter what happens, I swear to you, we will not let his sacrifice be in vain. We will fight on together until your people are safe and the Zorgon threat is ended." The weight of their shared responsibility hung heavy in the air, the fate of an entire civilization resting on their shoulders. As the sound of approaching Wadi shuttles filled the chamber, Mark and Karos braced themselves for the difficult choices and battles that lay ahead. The future of the galaxy would be forged in the crucible of their unity and the strength of their bond. As the weight of Emperor Zoltar's fate pressed down on them, Mark's mind raced. Suddenly a memory flashed through his thoughts, a glimpse of a revolutionary Wadi medical device he had studied during his time at the university. A portable stasis pod, capable of placing a patient in suspended animation until proper treatment could be administered. It was their only hope. "Karos, the stasis pod. It's in your father's private medical facility here in the palace. We have to get him there now," Mark urged, his voice strained with urgency. Karos nodded, her eyes widening with realization. They carefully lifted the Emperor's limp form, blood seeping through their fingers as they navigated the winding corridors of the palace. The distant sounds of battle echoed through the halls, a stark reminder of the chaos that engulfed the city. They burst into the medical facility, a pristine haven amidst the destruction. Mark located the stasis pod, its sleek silver surface gleaming under the harsh lights. With trembling hands, they gently transferred the Emperor into the device, securing the life support systems and activating the suspension sequence. Just as the pod hummed to life, a deafening explosion rocked the building. The palace's defenses had been breached, and Zorgon reinforcements poured in like a relentless tide. Mark and Karos exchanged a grim look, knowing they had to fight their way out to protect the Emperor at all costs. They took up defensive positions, their weapons at the ready. Mark's rifle barked, each shot finding its mark as he felled Zorgon after Zorgon. Karos wielded her plasma saber with deadly grace, the blade sizzling as it sliced through enemy armor. Their team formed a tight perimeter around the stasis pod, moving as one towards the extraction point. But the Zorgons kept coming, wave after wave of ruthless warriors determined to crush the Wadi resistance. As they neared the palace gates, Mark realized they wouldn't make it without a diversion. He locked eyes with Karos, a silent understanding passing between them. With a curt nod, Mark broke formation, sprinting towards a nearby alcove. "Keep going, I'll hold them off," he shouted over the din of battle, unleashing a hail of covering fire. Karos hesitated for a split second, her heart wrenching at the thought of leaving Mark behind. But she knew he was giving them a chance, a precious window to escape with her father. With a fierce battle cry, she led the team onwards, the stasis pod at the center of their formation. Mark fought like a man possessed, his rifle spitting death into the advancing Zorgon ranks. But for every enemy he felled, 2 more seemed to take their place. Soon he found himself surrounded, his ammunition running low. A shadow fell over him, and he looked up to see a towering figure clad in ornate battle armor. It was Krax, the ruthless Zorgon commander, his eyes glinting with malice. With a savage blow, Krax knocked Mark's weapon aside, his clawed hand closing around the human's throat. "You have been a thorn in my side for too long, Earthling," Krax snarled, his grip tightening. "But now you will serve a greater purpose. You will be the key to the Wadi princess's downfall." As blackness crept into the edges of his vision, Mark could only watch helplessly as Krax's soldiers dragged him away. His last thoughts were of Karos, a desperate prayer that she and her father had reached safety. In the chaos of the extraction, Karos could only watch in horror as Mark's distant form was overwhelmed by the Zorgon forces. Her heart screamed at her to go back, to fight for him, but she knew her duty to her father and her people came first. With a heavy heart, she boarded the waiting shuttle, the stasis pod secured in the cargo hold. As they lifted off, Karos's mind raced with possibilities. She had to find a way to save Mark, to turn the tables on the Zorgons and rescue the man who had risked everything for her people. An idea began to form, a dangerous gambit that would require all her cunning and courage. She thought of the whispers she had heard, rumors of a rogue Zorgon faction that had grown disillusioned with Krax's brutal leadership. If she could make contact, persuade them to join her cause, they might stand a chance of infiltrating the Zorgon command center and freeing Mark. It was a desperate plan, fraught with risk, but Karos knew she had no choice. Mark had sacrificed himself for her and her father, and she would move heaven and earth to bring him back. With a steely resolve, she began to plot her next move, determined to turn the tide of the war and save the man she had grown to love. With the Zorgan command center in ruins and Mark safely in her arms, Karos allowed herself a moment of relief. But the respite was short-lived. Reports flooded in from across the planet. The Zorgan forces, though weakened, were regrouping for a final, desperate assault. As they huddled around a makeshift strategy table, a familiar voice crackled over the comms. "Karos, Mark, come in. This is Colonel Hawkins of the Earth Special Forces. We're on our way with reinforcements." Mark's eyes widened in disbelief. Colonel Hawkins had been his commanding officer back on Earth, a grizzled veteran of countless battles. If he was here, it meant the cavalry had arrived. The human transport ships screamed through the atmosphere, their hulls glowing from the heat of re-entry. They touched down in a swirl of dust, ramps slamming open to reveal rows of battle-hardened soldiers in advanced exosuits, wielding weapons that crackled with barely contained energy. Colonel Hawkins strode down the ramp, his weathered face split by a grin as he clasped Mark's arm. "Damn good to see you, Collins. Those tourists you saved managed to get a message out. We came as fast as we could." Hawkins chuckled. "Damn right. Experimental plasma rifles, exosuits with reactive armor, and a few other surprises. We're here to even the odds." As the human soldiers unloaded their gear, Mark and Karos gathered the Wadi commanders. Mark stepped forward, his voice ringing with authority. "Listen up. We've got one shot at this. The Zorgons are tough, but they're not invincible. We need to hit them hard and fast, disrupt their command structure, and cut off their supply lines." He gestured to a holographic map, highlighting key installations. "We'll split into strike teams. Alpha will target their communications hub, Beta their armories, and Gamma their power generators. Once we've softened them up, we'll draw their main force into this canyon here, where Delta Team will be waiting with heavy weapons." Karos nodded, her eyes blazing with determination. "The Wadi know every inch of this terrain. We'll use that to our advantage, lead them into ambushes, and hit them where they least expect it." The final battle erupted, with a roar of plasma fire and the thunder of explosions. Mark led Alpha Team in a daring raid on the Zorgan Communications Center, his rifles spitting blue-white bolts of energy as they carved a path through the enemy ranks. Karos spearheaded Beta Team's assault on the armories, her plasma saber a blinding arc of destruction. Across the battlefield, human exosuits clashed with Zorgon war machines in titanic duels of metal and might. The Wadi darted through the chaos, striking from the shadows with preternatural speed and agility. But the Zorgons fought with the ferocity of cornered beasts. For every one that fell, two more seemed to take its place. Just as the tide began to turn in the Allies' favor, a deafening roar split the air. Krax, the Zorgon commander, burst from the smoke in a towering mechanized battlesuit. Its armored plates shimmered with a sickly green energy field, deflecting incoming fire like rain. The suit's massive fists smashed through the Allied lines, scattering soldiers like rag dolls. Mark and Karos, seeing the devastation, knew they had to act. "Hawkins," Mark yelled into his comms, "keep them busy. We're going after Krax." With a burst of speed, they sprinted across the battlefield, dodging explosions and energy blasts. They wove through the crumbling ruins of an ancient Wadi temple, luring Krax away from the main fight. The battlesuit thundered after them, its footsteps shaking the ground. Mark and Karos took cover behind a fallen pillar, their hearts pounding. Krax's amplified voice boomed from the suit's speakers. "Foolish primitives! You think you can best me? I will grind your bones to dust!" Mark's mind raced, searching for a weakness. Suddenly a memory flashed through his thoughts, a schematic of Zorgan battle armor he had studied during his time at the university. There was a vulnerability, a small gap in the shielding near the power core. He turned to Karos, his voice urgent. "I know how to beat him, but I need you to distract him. Buy me some time." Karos nodded, her grip tightening on her plasma saber. "I'll give you all the time you need." With a fierce battle cry, Karos leapt from cover, her saber flashing. She danced around the battlesuit, ducking and weaving as its massive fists swung at her. Mark circled behind, his eyes locked on the suit's back. "There? A small panel barely visible beneath the overlapping plates. Mark raised his rifle, took a steadying breath, and fired. The plasma bolt struck true, the panel shattering in a shower of sparks. Krax howled in rage as the battlesuit stumbled, its movements turning jerky and erratic. Karos seized the moment, leaping onto the suit's back. With a scream of defiance, she plunged her saber into the exposed power core. The battlesuit convulsed, arcs of energy coursing over its frame. Krax's howls turned to shrieks of agony as the suit's systems overloaded. In a blinding flash, the core detonated, the suit exploding in a maelstrom of fire and shrapnel. Mark threw himself over Karos, shielding her from the blast. As the smoke cleared, they stared at the smoldering wreckage, scarcely daring to believe it was over. But a cheer rose from the battlefield. Human and Wadi voices joined in triumph. The Zorgon forces, seeing their leader fall, broke and fled, their will to fight shattered. Mark and Karos stood amidst the ruins, battered and bloodied but alive. They embraced, their laughter mingling with tears of relief. The war was won, but the true battle, the battle for peace and understanding between their peoples, was only just beginning. Hand in hand they strode out to meet their comrades, ready to face whatever challenges the future might bring. With Krax's defeat, Mark and Karos raced back to the main battlefield, their hearts pounding with a mix of triumph and trepidation. As they crested the hill, a scene of chaos greeted them. Plasma bolts crisscrossed the sky, the air thick with smoke and the cries of the wounded. But amidst the carnage, a glimmer of hope shone through. The Wadi and human forces, bolstered by news of Mark and Karos's victory, surged forward with renewed vigor. The Zorgon lines wavered, then buckled under the onslaught. "Push forward! Drive them back!" Mark roared, his rifle blazing as he charged into the fray. Beside him, Karos was a whirlwind of motion, her plasma saber carving a path through the enemy ranks. As they fought, a ripple of confusion spread through the Zorgon forces. A group of soldiers, led by a tall, fierce-looking warrior, suddenly broke away from the main body, their weapons lowered. The leader stepped forward, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. "I am Commander Zath of the Zorgon 7th Legion," he declared, his voice carrying over the din of battle. "I speak for those among us who have grown weary of this war, of Krax's tyranny. We seek a new path, one of peace and cooperation." Mark and Karos exchanged a glance, their minds racing with the implications. They approached Zath cautiously, their weapons still at the ready. "You would betray your own people?" Karos asked, her eyes narrowed in suspicion. Zath shook his head. "Not betray, but save. This war has brought nothing but suffering and death. It is time for a change." "Very well," Mark said, his voice firm. "We will negotiate a ceasefire, or that any treachery will be met with swift retribution." Zath bowed his head. "I understand. You have my word and the word of those who follow me." With a few terse commands, the fighting ground to a halt. Wadi, human and Zorgon soldiers alike lowered their weapons, a tense calm settling over the battlefield. Mark and Karos, along with Zath and a handful of Wadi and human leaders, withdrew to a nearby command tent to hammer out the details of the ceasefire. Hours later, as the twin suns of the Wadi homeworld dipped towards the horizon, a new dawn was breaking. The Wadi Emperor, revived from his stasis pod and still weak but alive, sat at the head of a large table, flanked by Mark, Karos, and the leaders of the human and Zorgon factions. One by one, the leaders signed the treaty, their signatures a testament to the hard-fought battles and sacrifices that had brought them to this moment. As the last pen lifted from the paper, a cheer erupted from the assembled crowd, a release of emotion that had been building for so long. In the days that followed, as the Wadi began the long process of rebuilding, Mark and Karos found themselves at the center of a new world. They were hailed as heroes, their names spoken with reverence and awe. But they knew that their work was far from over. As Mark stepped into his new role as liaison between the Wadi, humans and reformed Zorgons, he felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. There were bridges to be built, wounds to be healed, and a fragile peace to be nurtured. Karos was by his side every step of the way, her strength and wisdom guiding him through the challenges that lay ahead. Together they worked tirelessly to foster understanding and collaboration between the once warring factions, drawing upon the trust and respect they had earned through their actions. It was a long and difficult road, fraught with setbacks and obstacles, but with each passing day, each small victory, they could feel the seeds of hope taking root, the dream of a united galaxy growing ever closer to reality. As Mark looked out over the rebuilding city, the scars of war still visible but fading, he felt a sense of pride and purpose that he had never known before. This was his calling, his destiny, and he would see it through to the end. Beside him, Karos slipped her hand into his, her touch a reminder of the unbreakable bond they shared. Together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead, secure in the knowledge that they had each other and the support of a galaxy that had finally found its way to peace. In the months that followed, Mark and Karos threw themselves into their new roles as leaders of the Galactic Security Council. They worked tirelessly to maintain the delicate peace they had fought so hard to achieve, mediating disputes and fostering cooperation between the Wadi, humans, and reformed Zorgons. But even as they savored the fruits of their labor, a sense of unease began to grow. Reports trickled in of mysterious attacks on trade routes, sabotage of communication networks, and whispered rumors of a shadowy group sowing discord among the allies. Mark leaned over the holotable, his brow furrowed as he studied the latest intelligence reports. Karos stood beside him, her eyes scanning the flickering images. "The Phantoms," she muttered, tracing a finger along a string of seemingly unrelated incidents. "That's what they're calling themselves." Mark nodded grimly. "Whoever they are, they're good. They know exactly where to strike to cause maximum chaos." Karos's hand found his, their fingers intertwining. "We'll find them, Mark. We didn't come this far to let some shadowy terrorists tear apart everything we've built." Over the next weeks, Mark and Karos pored over every scrap of data, chasing down leads and piecing together a picture of their new enemy. They worked late into the night, subsisting on stim shots and sheer determination. Finally, a pattern emerged. The Phantom's attacks all seemed to originate from a single sector, a remote and largely uncharted region of space. "There," Karos said, jabbing a finger at the star map. "That's where we'll find them." Mark assembled a team of their most trusted operatives, a mix of Wadi, human, and Zorgon specialists. They boarded a sleek, state-of-the-art stealth ship and set out for the unknown. As they approached the coordinates, a small, unremarkable planet came into view. Scans revealed no signs of life or technology on the surface, but Mark's instincts told him they were on the right track. They landed in a barren, rocky valley, the ship's camouflage systems rendering it nearly invisible against the dull, grey landscape. Mark and Karos led the team out, their weapons at the ready. For hours they trekked through the lifeless terrain, sensors sweeping for any hint of their quarry. Just as they were about to give up, Karos's scanner pinged. "There's a hidden entrance 20 meters ahead," she said, her voice tight with anticipation. They approached cautiously, and Mark spotted it, a seamless door set into the rock face nearly invisible to the naked eye. He ran his fingers along the edges, searching for a latch or keypad. Suddenly the door slid open with a hiss, revealing a dimly lit tunnel that descended deep into the earth. Mark and Karos exchanged a glance, then stepped inside, their team close behind. As they wound their way deeper into the complex, the rough-hewn rock gave way to sleek metal walls and pulsing conduits. They emerged into a vast underground chamber, filled with banks of humming machinery and rows of glowing tanks. And there, standing at the center of it all, was a figure Mark had hoped never to see again. Dr. Elias Roth, the brilliant xenobiologist who had been Mark's mentor at the university, before his radical theories had gotten him expelled and exiled. "Dr. Roth!" Mark called out, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "What are you doing here?" Roth turned, a smile playing across his gaunt features. "Ah, Mark, I always knew you'd be the one to find me. You and your lovely Wadi companion. He gestured to the tanks, each one containing a floating unconscious form. "Behold the future of the galaxy. My phantoms, an army of perfect soldiers, their minds and bodies enhanced by my technology." Mark's grip tightened on his weapon. "You're insane, Roth. We won't let you unleash this monstrosity on the galaxy." Roth's smile only widened. "Insane? No, Mark. I'm the only one who sees clearly. The wars, the conflicts, the petty squabbles between species, it's all a symptom of a greater problem, the chaos of free will." He tapped a sequence into a control panel, and the tanks began to drain, the figures inside stirring to life. "With my mind control technology, I will bring order to the galaxy. I will reshape it in my image, a perfect universe where every being serves a higher purpose." Mark and Karos readied their weapons, their team fanning out behind them. They had come too far, sacrificed too much, to let a madman's twisted vision destroy all they had built. As the first of Roth's phantoms stepped from their tanks, their eyes glowing with an eerie blue light, Mark and Karos charged forward, ready to face whatever horrors lay ahead. Their love for each other, and for the peace they had worked so hard to create, would be their greatest weapon in the battle to come. In the aftermath of the Phantom Crisis, the galaxy breathed a collective sigh of relief. The Wadi, humans, and reformed Zorgans worked tirelessly to rebuild their shattered worlds, their bonds of friendship and cooperation growing stronger with each passing day. Mark and Karos, hailed as the heroes who had saved the galaxy from Roth's madness, found themselves at the center of this new era of unity. As they stepped off the transport ship onto the bustling tarmac of Earth's capital spaceport, Mark and Karos were greeted by a sea of flashing cameras and cheering crowds. Dignitaries from across the stars had gathered to attend the historic Galactic Peace Summit, a meeting that would shape the future of their alliance. Mark, dressed in a crisp military uniform adorned with medals of honor, smiled and waved to the assembled masses. Karos, resplendent in traditional Wadi ceremonial robes, stood tall by his side, her presence a symbol of the unbreakable bond between their peoples. As they made their way through the throngs of well-wishers and journalists, Mark's wrist communicator buzzed with an incoming message. Glancing down, he saw that the sender was listed as unknown. Curious, he tapped the screen to open the message. "Beware," the text read, the words glowing an ominous red against the black background. "There are those who seek to sabotage the summit and reignite the flames of war. Trust no one." Mark's brow furrowed as he read the cryptic warning. He showed the message to Karos, who frowned, her eyes darkening with concern. "We can't afford to take any chances," she said, her voice low and urgent. "If there's even a chance that this threat is real, we have to investigate." Mark nodded, his mind already racing with possibilities. They had fought too hard and sacrificed too much to let the fragile peace they had built be shattered by the machinations of a few shadowy figures. As they entered the summit hall, Mark and Karos were greeted by a sea of familiar faces. Leaders from the Wadi, human, and Zorgan worlds mingled and chatted, their laughter and animated conversations filling the air with a sense of camaraderie and hope. But beneath the surface, Mark and Karos could sense an undercurrent of tension. They caught snippets of hushed conversations, saw furtive glances exchanged between delegates. Something was amiss, and they were determined to get to the bottom of it. Slipping away from the main reception, Mark and Karos made their way to a private meeting room. There they were joined by a small group of trusted allies, Colonel Hawkins of the Earth Special Forces, Commander Zath of the Zorgon 7th Legion, and Rikos, Karos's most skilled Wadi operative. "We've received intelligence that suggests there's a plot to disrupt the summit," Mark said, his voice grave as he brought up a holographic display of the message he had received. "We don't know who's behind it, but we have to assume that they're well-connected and well-funded." Hawkins leaned forward, his weathered face creased with concern. "Our sources have been whispering about a shadowy network of arms dealers and war profiteers," he said, tapping a series of coordinates on the display. "They've been funneling weapons and resources to extremist factions across the galaxy, stoking the fires of conflict for their own gain." Zath growled, his reptilian eyes narrowing. "The Zorgon Empire has been plagued by these scum for generations," he said, his voice thick with anger. "They prey on the weak, the desperate, and the foolish, promising power and glory in exchange for blood and suffering." Karos nodded, her expression grim. "We've seen the same thing among the Wadi," she said, her fingers tightening around the hilt of her plasma saber. "These dealers are like a cancer, eating away at the very foundations of our society." Mark studied the holographic map, his mind racing with possibilities. "We need to strike at the heart of their network," he said, his voice filled with determination. "Cut off their supply lines, disrupt their operations, and gather the evidence we need to bring them to justice." The others nodded, their faces set with resolve. They knew that the task before them would be dangerous, that they would be pitting themselves against some of the most ruthless and well-connected criminals in the galaxy. But they also knew that they had no choice. The future of their worlds, of the fragile peace they had fought so hard to achieve, hung in the balance. They would not let the sacrifices of the past be in vain. As they prepared to leave the meeting room, Mark turned to Karos, his eyes locking with hers. "Together?" he asked, his voice soft but filled with a fierce determination. And with that, they set out to face the shadows, ready to fight for the light of hope and unity, no matter the cost. As the galaxy settled into a new era of peace and cooperation, Mark and Karos found themselves at the forefront of a new challenge. Their roles as guardians of the fragile alliance between the Wadi, humans and reformed Zorgons had them constantly on the move, addressing concerns and mediating disputes across the stars. It was during one of these brief moments of respite that the urgent distress call came in. A remote Wadi colony, on the fringes of explored space, had fallen silent, and the local authorities were requesting immediate assistance from the Galactic Security Council. Without hesitation, Mark and Karos boarded their sleek, state-of-the-art spacecraft and set a course for the colony. As they dropped out of hyperspace and entered the planet's atmosphere, a sense of unease settled over them. The once thriving settlement lay in ruins, its buildings crumbling and its streets deserted. Donning protective gear, Mark and Karos ventured into the eerie stillness of the colony. The first thing that struck them was the smell, a sickly sweet odor that hung heavy in the air, clinging to their suits and infiltrating their senses. As they pressed deeper into the heart of the settlement, they began to encounter the bodies. Wadi colonists, their blue skin mottled with grotesque lesions and their eyes staring blankly, lay strewn across the ground. Some had been caught in the midst of their daily routines, their tools and belongings scattered around them. Others were huddled together, as if seeking comfort in their final moments. Mark knelt beside one of the victims, his scanner whirring as he collected samples and data. "I've never seen anything like this," he muttered, his voice tight with concern. "It's not just killing them. It's mutating their bodies, warping their very DNA." Karos nodded grimly, her own scanner flashing with incoming information. "And it's spreading fast. We need to contain this outbreak before it can reach other Wadi worlds." They worked tirelessly, setting up quarantine zones and decontamination chambers, gathering every scrap of evidence they could find. But even as they raced against the clock, the plague continued to claim more lives, the pile of bodies growing with each passing hour. It was in the colony's central research facility that they found the first clue. A series of encrypted files hidden deep within the mainframe hinted at a dark secret lurking beneath the surface. As Mark and Karos delved deeper, a terrifying picture began to emerge. The plague was not a natural occurrence, but a bioweapon, engineered with chilling precision to target Wadi physiology, and the mastermind behind this atrocity was none other than Dr. Nora Krell, a brilliant but troubled human scientist who had once been a colleague of Mark's at the Galactic University. Krell, they discovered, had become disillusioned with the idea of interspecies cooperation, believing that humanity should assert its dominance over the galaxy. The plague was just the first step in her twisted plan to wipe out the Wadi and other alien races, leaving humanity as the sole power in the universe. With a growing sense of urgency, Mark and Karos set out to track down Krell, following a trail of clues that led them to a hidden laboratory on a desolate moon. As they approached the facility, the weight of their task settled upon them like a suffocating cloak. They knew that the fate of the Wadi, and perhaps the entire galaxy, rested on their shoulders, and as they prepared to confront the rogue scientist and her monstrous creation, they could only hope that their bond, forged in the crucible of war and tempered by the trials they had faced together, would be strong enough to see them through this darkest of hours. The airlock hissed open, and Mark and Karos stepped into the sterile corridors of Krell's hidden laboratory. The air was thick with the hum of machinery and the acrid tang of chemicals. Shadows danced across the walls, cast by the flickering light of computer screens and the eerie glow of containment tanks. As they made their way deeper into the facility, the silence was broken by the sound of footsteps echoing off the metal floors. They whirled around, weapons at the ready, to find themselves face to face with Dr. Nora Krell herself. The rogue scientist stood before them, her once bright eyes now glazed with madness and her features twisted into a sneer of contempt. "Well, well," she purred, her voice dripping with malice, "if it isn't the great Mark Collins and his alien pet. Come to save the day, have you?" Krell laughed, a harsh, grating sound that set their teeth on edge. "You're too late, Mark. The final strain of the virus is already complete. With a single command, I can unleash it upon every Wadi world in the galaxy, and there's nothing you can do to stop me." Karos stepped forward, her plasma saber humming to life. "We'll see about that," she growled, her eyes flashing with determination. And with that, the battle was joined. Krell's laboratory came alive with the sounds of combat, the sizzle of plasma bolts and the clang of metal on metal. Mark and Karos fought side by side, their movements perfectly synchronized as they dodged and weaved through the chaos. But Krell was a formidable opponent, her mastery of the virus granting her unnatural speed and strength. She lashed out with tendrils of sickly green energy, the very essence of the plague made manifest. Mark cried out in pain as one of the tendrils grazed his arm, the flesh beneath his suit bubbling and blistering. Karos leapt to his defense, her saber flashing as she drove Krell back. Together they pushed forward, inch by bloody inch, until they stood before the main control console. With a final desperate lunge, Mark slammed his fist down on the override button, the screens flashing with warnings as the facility's self-destruct sequence initiated. But even as the countdown ticked away, the rogue scientist had one last trick up her sleeve. With a final defiant gesture, she released the virus, the deadly strain filling the air with a sickly green mist. Karos, who had been closest to the console, inhaled the virus before she could seal her suit. She stumbled, her eyes widening in horror as she felt the first symptoms take hold. Mark caught her as she fell, his heart shattering as he watched the woman he loved succumb to the very plague they had fought so hard to stop. With a final, agonized scream, he scooped her into his arms and raced for the exit, the laboratory exploding behind them in a blinding flash of light and heat. In the days that followed, Mark worked tirelessly with the Wadi scientists, using the data they had collected from the colony and Krell's lab to develop a cure for the plague. But even as they saved countless lives, they could not bring back those who had already been lost. Karos, the love of his life, the woman who had stood by his side through the darkest of times, was gone, and as Mark stood before her funeral pyre, watching the flames consume her body, he felt a part of himself die with her. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.